All right, hello everybody. So tonight I'm going to be going over retaking the SAT. I'm going to give you guys some feedback that I received from hundreds of students and industry experts to discuss, what happened on the March SAT and how we can help students improve when retaking it. As you probably know, the feedback from the first administration of the digital SAT was quite poor. The test itself was very challenging for students, and I think students found it to be extremely difficult compared to the practice tools that were given out by the College Board. So I'll definitely explain a lot more about that. If anyone does have a question at any point in time, feel free to throw it in the chat, and I will answer them as they come. So that's not a problem at all. So let's get into it. So a little bit about myself. We've been I've personally been doing SAT prep now for 20 years, so I've already been through 3 changes to the SAT. The first one being in 2005, the next one being in 2015, and then now this one in 2024. As you can tell, they shortened the time frame a little bit there. So usually it was 10 years where they changed the SAT, and this time it was about 8 years because of the PSAT that was given in October. And that is part of the contributing reason as to why this was a little bit is going to be a little bit touch and go in the beginning because it was a little bit rushed. A lot of this has to do with COVID, test optional, and all kinds of stuff that I'll discuss. We created all new materials for the digital SAT, have an all new platform, so we're very prepared for it. But I think in general, students found it to be a little bit challenging, and I'll go over the reasons why. So, I'm going to kind of fly through these beginning slides because I think a lot of people probably already have this information. But if anyone has a question, of course, feel free to step in with a question. Why does the SAT even matter, right? Many schools have brought back the SAT requirements. You probably heard about Yale, Dartmouth, University of Texas now. So it's really starting to come flying in very quickly, and these changes are also happening extremely quickly. So this is not something that is happening slowly. It seems to be happening faster than even I expected. I thought it was going to be probably a good 5 to 10 years where schools were going to be fully test optional, but that seems to be reversing a bit. And a lot of that has to do with the data that colleges are collecting on students who went test optional and students that did not. So not really as much as how much does it affect the actual students' test performance. Hold on one second. Let me just close my door. Sorry. Sorry about that. It's not so much about the scores themselves, but it's about the results that schools are getting from their classes and the results that they're getting from the students' GPAs when they actually get into college. So the big one was University of Texas did a study, and they found that students that did send in tests had a 0.86 higher GPA than students that did not after a few years. So if you think about that in numbers, right, that's like the difference between a 3.5 and a 2.6, 2.7. So that is a big difference, and that's obviously a huge problem for them, right? So that's why schools that are looking at things like that are reverting back to test required policies. The second big reason is that the intended purpose of test optional when it started was to, uplift students in need, for colleges to find the diamonds in the rough, the students that didn't have test preparation or that, didn't go to a good school or whatever the case may be. And that has also backfired. So colleges are finding that they're not able to find those students anymore because they just are not encouraged to take tests, and they're not they don't have access to extracurricular activities, sports teams, internships, so on and so forth. So that's the second problem, is that it's actually decreased the diversity of these schools, which is a huge problem for them as well. So I would expect, and it's an important thing for the students that are preparing for the test, that this trend is going to continue. So it's likely that more colleges will continue to revert their test optional policies or alter them in some way, that's what a lot of colleges are going to do, is have this kind of quasi test optional, test flexible, you could call it, policy, where they'll take kind of any test. I mean, even AP exams are a good indicator of college performance as well, and that's why those are so important for students to take. The other big factor, and the reason why there's still a huge focus on this, is scholarships. placement and the just general admission rate being higher for students that do send in tests. A lot of schools, like I spoke at an admitted students event for a college last week. I go to a lot of industry events, I go to conferences and stuff like that, and the colleges have kind of indicated that, you know, it's really been challenging for them, and that they do sometimes even assign what they call a standard score to a student that doesn't have a score, and that standard score is oftentimes very low. So that's another problem for students that aren't submitting a test score. As I said, scholarships another big reason. All right, so, you know, to kind of get to the meat and potatoes of what we're talking about tonight, should you retake the SAT? I mean, the answer to that is definitely yes. I mean, the students, and the unfortunate part for all the students that are taking this first round of digital SATs is, unfortunately, we are all the guinea pigs of the College Board, right? They have to work out their kinks. They have to figure out, you know, what kind of test they want this test to be. I think they have a good idea, but obviously, you know, the beginning is always going to be a little bit challenging, right? Let's go back in time, right? Let's go back to before the whole digital SAT to, you know, when we had the paper SAT, and obviously for the ACT still being predominantly on paper, students typically take these tests 2-3 times. I mean, that's kind of the norm, especially for students that want high scores. That is not going to change. If anything, you know, with a totally new test, you got to give it a few cracks to kind of understand how it works and get the score that you want. And that's totally normal. And that's how it's been since I've been doing this for the past 20 years. Even when I was in high school, I took the SAT 2 times. And that was, you know, I guess normal then. Now the norm is probably more like 3 times. Some students do more than that. I'm not necessarily recommending that students do more than 3, but if they need to, they need to, you know, and that's kind of just how it is. And that's why I always encourage people to look at this as a long-winded process. To get your best results, you got to take your time with it. You got to prepare for a long time. Slow and steady wins the race. That has always been the case with standardized tests. Any parents on here, if you took any kind of placement exam, bar exam, CPA exam, CFA exam, all of these exams, tough, standardized, comprehensive tests. Slow and steady wins the race. And a lot of the parents always talk to me about, they took some of these tests that I just mentioned, how they did a lot of practice tests. Like, okay, doing the CPA exam, doing the bar exam, you're doing Barbary, whatever, if any lawyers out there like myself, you had to do a lot of practice questions and a lot of practice tests. And that's one of the big issues with the digital SAT is there's not a lot out there. Luckily, we do have the testing app, which has 10 tests in it and also has hundreds of additional practice questions. Of all the students that come here, it's 850 students that took the March SAT. I don't know if any of them completed all of it. And I don't think that they necessarily should complete all of it. That would be a lot, right? But at least completing a large chunk of it would be extremely helpful in the students feeling prepared and doing well. So how do you know if you need to take it again, right? Did I reach my goal? That answer to that is no. Then you want to try again. And obviously another big one is, did I make a mistake? Did something go wrong, right? Did I run out of time? I never ran out of time before. Did I get thrown off by the nature of taking a real standardized test? Was I nervous, right? These are totally common things for students to experience. I personally experienced them in taking the large amount of standardized tests I've taken. I took the SAT multiple times, took the LSAT multiple times. Luckily, I only took the bar exam once. That's a pass-fail. So that one, I'm happy that I didn't have to take again. But for these tests where you get a score, it's not just pass-fail. Most people, someone like myself, I'm extremely adept at tests. It comes very easy to me. Even I have to take it a few times, right? So that's because I want to get a high score. Another thing to look at is what schools am I interested in, and is my score in line with that? That's obviously a good barometer. If I need to take it again, maybe I should look at what do the schools require? Am I close to that? Am I just a few points below that? I definitely can get over that hurdle. Am I far off? I need to do more studying, whatever the case may be. That's a good barometer. How close am I to some schools that I'd be interested in? A lot of people look at this and say, I just want to get the highest score possible for myself, and that's totally fine as well. That's another good reason to take the test again. The other big one is the time frame, right? Do I have the time to take the test again. And obviously for any 11th grader now, you have plenty of time to, prep more for the test and take the test again. So that for anyone preparing now, that's not an issue, but I think that would be more of an issue as you get into like, the fall, right? So then there's like limited opportunities left. Like now for the SAT, you have, the May test, you have possibly school day tests mixed in there, you have the June test, the August test, and then the October test, and then even possibly the November test, but more likely just the October test. So you have tons of opportunities to retake the test. And for any student that took the SAT the first time in March, you could easily get in, a few more without, stressing out too much. So that's another big factor is the timeline, but everyone now is on a good timeline. A lot of students that came here did the paper SAT, so some of them have that on their record, and now they're doing the digital SAT. So that's a different, a little bit of a different circumstance, but those students probably a little bit more ahead of the game than those that didn't do that. So what are the benefits of retaking the SAT? And I think now, especially with, the students in the position that they're in right now, with this totally new test, the benefits are even bigger than they normally would be. Number one is the super scoring. So if you did well in one part, you can kind of focus more on the other part. Number two, going into the test again will give you increased confidence, just that you've experienced it. And when I go into like actual prep strategies and what students should be doing, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. You don't even have the opportunity to super score if you don't take the test again. So not only can you improve with it, but it won't even be available if you don't take the test twice. You have increased chance of getting a scholarship. And, I think the big one is the opportunity to learn from errors. Now, there probably should be an asterisk there because unfortunately, and this is another challenge for the digital SAT, we cannot see the students' tests. The students cannot see their tests. We cannot see their tests. No one can see their test. So that makes it a little more challenging. If we backtrack a few years, or we look at the ACT, you can pay an extra $30 or whatever, something in that vicinity, and they can actually mail you a copy of your test. They don't mail you this exact one that you wrote on, but they mail you, actually now they just email you a PDF, and they email your question answers, and you can actually go over that. And that's hugely, hugely helpful to the students. Now, what can we do to kind of replace that for the digital SAT since that's no longer available? Well, that's where the practice testing system comes into play, right? So like I said earlier, we have the practice testing system. It has 10 full tests and then hundreds of additional practice questions. You can do the tests on there. If you want to have something to evaluate, that's something that I can look at. For any customer of Curve Breakers, I'm happy to go through the student score report. We can't really do that for the digital SAT because it doesn't provide that much information. But for the testing platform, we can go through that, and that's something that I do all the time. So, open invitation for any student that wants to discuss their practice test score or performance with myself individually. I'm happy to do that. And that's really, and this is like one of the big things I'm going to get into in a little bit, is where things have changed from the paper tests to the digital tests. That's a hugely important part of the process. I think every student should try to do a practice test maybe once a month is a good barometer. I use that, and I encourage that for all the students that come here, especially the private tutoring students who do have a more long-winded plan. And it's hugely, hugely important. I think that's something that has kind of been lost with the digital test, because it's so easy to say, I just want to do this on my computer at home. And to do the test at home is different than doing the test in an office with other kids, and the real timing, and no breaks, no pausing, and having to finish it all at once, right? So that's a huge part of being prepared for the test. And if we backtrack to 2 or 3 years ago, this is just interesting piece of information for all the parents and students. We just changed offices over to our new office where we have 2 classrooms. Each classroom fits about 20 students. About pre-COVID, we had a smaller office that had 1 classroom, and that 1 classroom had about 20 seats. You could fit approximately 20 students in the room. Pre-COVID, every Saturday and Sunday, we would have a practice test in the morning, 9 o'clock, and we still do that. That's something that's available to anyone that wants to take one. We actually had so many students trying to take practice SATs and ACTs that we couldn't even fit them in the room. We had to turn them away. And this is when Curve Breakers was a much smaller company, and maybe we had 200 total students per year, right? So that means, about 10% of the students would be taking a test, every weekend. That kind of makes sense. A lot of students obviously are not going to do it every single, every month. But, if you kind of add up the math there, it does make sense that you'd have, a little bit of an overflow. You have new customers, you have old customers, you have, class students. And we actually had to turn people away, right? We had to say, we don't have room this weekend. We don't have room on Saturday. You got to come on Sunday or come next week or something like that. Now, with almost 1,000 students, the room is just filled with, 12 ACT kids and, 1 or 2 SAT kids. So that's a big change, right? Because a lot of the SAT kids want to do the test at home, or they're just not focusing on that. And that is something that changing that, right? Parents and students focusing on doing the practice test, getting that evaluation, getting that practice, getting that those reps in, so to speak, can really help increase student scores. So that's openly available to anybody. So anyone that is taking the test again, that wants to do another practice test, just reach out to my office, call us, email me, email one of my team members, and we will plug you into the practice test. So that's why I got 2 classrooms, because before obviously the SAT change, we had this all in the works. We're going to need more space, right? We don't have enough space. And now the space is not being utilized because students are not doing the practice test, even though they're free or part of the program, or, whatever the case may be, right? So that's a big change. And I think that has to just do with the digital test and just the nature of it and how it's kind of transpired. So as I said earlier, 2 to 3 tests is kind of the typical amount. Students, typical preparation would be 3 months leading up to the first exam, and then continuing that until the second exam and the third exam. This is obviously for students that really want to prepare vigorously for the test. Does everyone do that? Obviously not, right? But like I said earlier, the best way to look at this is a slow and steady wins the race process. I take my first test, I learn from that. I take my practice tests, I learn from those. I take my next real test, and then I can achieve huge success, right? That's a very common prep strategy, even for students doing this at home. So say you're just a student on here, gaining this information, and you wanted to study on your own for your next test, or you're just studying at home, do your practice tests, evaluate your performance, time yourself, make sure that you're doing that in an appropriate environment, and then retake the test, right? So a good rule of thumb is students should be spending, a few hours studying for every hour of prep time. So if they have a tutor, you spend 1 hour with your tutor, you should do a few hours of studying on your own at home. That can include doing practice questions, practice exercises. Like I said, we have thousands of questions in the app. So, the testing app. So those are all available to the students. There's hundreds of them. It actually grades them for you. It shows us how you do, and we can use that to help you. So I would encourage students to take advantage of all those things, and try to put in that self-study time as well. If you just go to the tutoring session, or you just go to the class and you don't do a lot in between, that's going to make it challenging to achieve success. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb. Another big question is, does taking the exam too many times look bad, right? And the answer to that is really no, because colleges just want a high score. That's all they really care about, right? This is just a numbers game. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. It's just a big game. I mean, that's the reality of the college admissions process today, with extremely low acceptance rates, massive application numbers, all this crazy stuff that goes on, colleges changing their policies, so on and so forth. Used to be a lot easier. I mean, obviously, parents remember back to when they did this, or, when I did this. I'm similar age to a lot of parents. It was very simple. You took the SAT once, maybe twice. You wrote out your college applications on paper. And because you had to do that, you weren't going to send in 20 of them, like maybe you did 6 or 5 or something like that. And that was it. And there wasn't a lot of supplemental essays. There wasn't a big focus on all that stuff. Now that has really changed, right? So students have to put in a massive effort to get what they want. You have to write tons of different essays. You have to take the test multiple times, because the score numbers just keep going up. And that's one of the problems that the College Board is facing, that I will definitely get to, and like some of the more nuanced changes to the test, right? So every time they change the test, they change the exam, but there's things that change about the scoring. So some of the parents may remember, between 2005 and 2015, the SAT was out of 2,400 points. So that was, before 2005, it was out of 1,600 points. Then from 2015 to 2005 to 2015, it was out of 2,400 points. And then in 2015, they went back to 1,600 points. And then now they changed it again and still out of 1,600 points, but there may be some other changes to the scoring. And the average score has changed over those time periods. So the average score used to be about 1,000. Then it was closer to 1,100. Then it was about 1,000. I mean, all these things, these little changes that really affect the scoring. I mean, a lot of parents, when I talk to parents, I always say, when I was going through this, I applied to, I don't know, Boston College, and I had a 1250 on the SAT, and I was accepted. And now that would obviously not be accepted. Part of that is not just the trends in college admissions, but the test itself. Like, that was a very good score at that time. A 1250 was good. There was not a lot of people scoring 1,400s 20 years ago. That was just very rare, and small percentage of people. The 99th percentile score has changed a lot, and it may be changing again, right? So these overhauls to the test change not only the test, but also like how the test is scored. So there's a lot of different changes, and especially to the PSAT, SAT system, which I'll get to in a minute. The students that, and this is, previously to the digital test, the students that, put in a lot of time should be able to increase their score, 100, 200 points on average. Obviously that may change now depending on how the new tests are scored. And a lot of that was just a comparison between their PSAT score and their SAT score. So, I've spoken to countless parents that said, I had, new customers calling after they got their March SAT score and they didn't prep, and now they're calling to kind of gain my advice on what to do. And, previously, if a student got say an 1,100 on the PSAT, it would be very realistic for them to get an 1,150 on the SAT without really studying, right? Now that seems to not be the case, right? So there's parents calling me saying my student got a 1,200 on the PSAT and took the SAT and got 1,000. So how does that make sense, right? They didn't, even without studying, you would assume that they would get the same score, right? But the PSAT, SAT system has changed. So previously to this, the PSAT was very similar to the SAT, if not almost the exact same test, just minus a few questions. Now the PSAT is basically an extremely light version of the SAT. So it's like, and the students listening to this can probably attest to the fact that they enjoyed the PSAT. It was very doable. It was like almost, fairer, or it seemed better, right? Shorter. It wasn't crazy. This is great, right? Everyone loves the SAT now. And then everyone goes in and takes the real SAT, and it's a million times harder. And that's not how it ever has been. We knew this to some degree. Our practice testing system is, overly challenging compared to the PSAT or the given SATs. But that's like a new thing in the system, is that the SAT is just way, 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 way harder than the PSAT. And that wasn't the case, for the past history of the SAT going back 20 years. So that goes into my next slide, which is, what are the issues of preparing for the digital SAT? Well, number one is what I was saying earlier. The College Board practice materials are not aligned to the test. I don't know if that's intentional or that was just a mistake on their part. The College Board released 4 practice tests on what's called the Blue Book app, which is the actual app that students take the SAT on. We obviously did all of those. We analyzed them. I personally did them. I've done all the administered SATs, even in the past before the digital SAT, but obviously with the new SAT, we took a look at all that. And then we heard from our partner, this testing partner, that the digital SAT has already been given in India for a year. And they reported that the students in India were saying the same thing that happened now to the students in the United States, which is that the real test is way harder than the test they gave out. Why they did that, it's hard to say. I think the main reason is the practice test and the PSAT are the SAT's marketing plan, right? So the SAT was in trouble. I mean, this is just factual, right? Like, everybody knows it. Everyone kind of has a general dislike for the SAT. It's not something that had, people like, wow, I really love that. I mean, you'd only have like nerdy person like myself saying that because, this is what I do for a living. But, I think the general consensus in society was that it's like unfair, it's not good, it's bad for students, so on and so forth, right? So to reverse that, they made the PSAT fairer or more doable and more enjoyable for the students. It's shorter, it's on a computer, the passages aren't as long. I mean, you can go to the ins and outs of why that was the case. And then, normally in our office, we would see a pretty even distribution between SAT students and ACT students, right? Like especially in private tutoring, about half the students would be doing the ACT, about half would be doing the SAT, and that's probably how it should be, right? Like everybody's different. Some students are better at the ACT, some are better at the SAT. Great, right? Like that's a totally normal setup. And now this time around, when the students did both tests, almost all of them preferred the digital SAT over the ACT because the digital SAT is much shorter and the PSAT was easy and people felt good about it, right? And that was successful marketing on their behalf. And then the real test comes around and it's not what it seemed, right? So that was definitely like a marketing ploy on their behalf. The other problem is students utilizing just those tools to practice were going to have an issue because the PSAT was just basically grossly inadequate to show a student what the real test would be like. And it gave students like kind of a false sense of what the real test was going to be like. And then they went into it and it was different. Luckily, the students and we did have a lot of students achieve really good scores in the digital SAT. Those students typically did a lot of the practice tests in the practice testing system and realized, wow, these are a lot harder. These math questions in particular are a lot harder. I got to get used to that, got used to it, and then found the SAT to be pretty normal. They still, I think, general consensus was it was challenging, but I think they found it to be more aligned with the actual practice tests that we gave than the practice tests that were in the College Board system. When we first started this, everybody, when we gave these practice tests to the system, I had immediate negative feedback from the students that like these tests are too hard, but it actually ended up being accurate in terms of what the real test was like. And this is just part of the process of preparing for a standardized test, right? If you grind out those practice tests, you do them, you learn from them, you will do well on the SAT, and that's just what it takes. And like I said earlier, with the practice testing numbers just generally being down, students not feeling it's as important, people moving away from the SAT, that kind of created that environment kind of dissipated a little bit. Whereas the ACT kids are in there doing the practice tests, periodically and getting that feedback, getting those results, and going over them with their tutor, that has really helped them. And the ACT kids are doing amazingly this year, and the scores are incredible. So I think obviously the SAT being new plays a part into that in that equation. It's just making it a little bit challenging, but the industry has to kind of adjust to that, and society in general just understand. Wow, this is hard. I got to really prepare. The other interesting circumstantial evidence that there was a problem was that immediately upon releasing the March SAT scores, 2 days after that, College Board miraculously produced 2 more practice tests, practice test 5 and practice test 6, on top of the first 4. And practice test 5 and practice test 6 are way harder. So either someone messed up or they got a lot of negative feedback and we're like, all right, we gotta give the kids something here that they can practice with. And I do suggest, and this is a great study habit for any student looking to retake the test, is to go in there and on the blue book or on the paper version and do test 5 and test 6, because that will give you a much better idea of what the real test is going to be like, especially in the math part. And that will be helpful to the students. So I'm glad that they did that. The timing is not great. Like it would have been great if they did that before the test, and then the students would have done those, and a lot of them would, right? And have known, wow, this is way harder. But that's just how they did it. I don't know why they do the things that they do. A lot of it has to do with public perception and marketing and stuff like that. And as I said earlier, we did have the testing platform. We still have, any student can take those practice tests, and those tests are challenging, and that's the whole point. We'd rather give students something challenging than something easy, because that's just a more effective way to prepare, right? You gotta kind of go through the process. You gotta go through the hard problems, and you gotta try to absorb them. Also, previously looking at the paper test and looking at the ACT, with so much information available, students were typically doing 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 tests between homework, practice problems, and practice tests before they actually sat for the real exam the first time. And then now that wasn't really as possible, and it just wasn't the what students thought they needed to do based on how easy things were on the PSAT and on these 4 practices. Like I had students getting near perfect scores on the Blue Book. This is the College Board's app. Going in there, getting 15 something, almost 1600s. And it just wasn't the reality like that. And they still did very well, right? But it wasn't a real score, like it was kind of a feel good endeavor by the College Board. I don't know why they did that, but and a lot of the tutors here took them, and we're all getting 1580, 1600, 1570, and like in an hour and a half. And it's like, this is easy. Like, this is not hard. And that I think was harmful to the students in general. But doesn't really, obviously with the past is behind us and looking forward to the next test. We do have the 2 new tests. We have the platform, and if students grind that out, they will do well. I mean, it's all going to work out. That's why I always, I've been like I said earlier, I've been through now a multitude of changes to the SAT, and every time the beginning is challenging, right? It's a guinea pig situation where they're testing out new things on students, and now it's a totally new platform, totally new test. So it's like 2 big things that are changing. In the prior changes to the SAT, it's the same thing, like same kind of test, paper, Scantron, number 2 pencil, like everything's the same, but the test is a little bit different. Now we've overhauled not only the test, but the whole entire, testing system, right? So students have to get more used to that. And once they do, they will do better. A lot of getting used to that has to do with sitting down for 2 hours and 15 minutes and doing the actual test. If there's any questions on that, feel free to, throw them into the chat. I know I'm kind of going through a lot of stuff here. Why is the College Board doing this? Well, as I said earlier, a lot of this is to do with marketing plan. If they gave out this March SAT as the PSAT, right, everyone would have hated the test and done the ACT. So they couldn't do that, right? I kind of understand their position. If students disliked the PSAT, they thought it was really hard, no one would have wanted to do it, right? And we would have also not wanted students to do it. So people would have opted for the ACT. And by giving out these like very fair, almost easy practice tests, it enticed many students to prepare for the exam, and that worked. That doesn't mean that it's always going to be this way. I think, now that they're releasing more material, it's going to be more that's more appropriate to prepare for the exam. That will definitely be helpful going forward, and it'll be a little bit easier on the students. But that said, they did discontinue the QAS, so that was the way that was the question and answer service. That was how students could actually look at their exam and review their performance. And we would do a lot of that. We would review the students' performance. We would go into their real test. We'd go over it with them. I would log into students' College Board accounts. I would go over the tests with the student, with the parents, and that was a great way to kind of figure out what we need to do next. And now that's not possible, and seemingly will not be possible for the foreseeable future unless they decide to reverse on that new change. Right, so that has required students to have to use third-party testing apps to test themselves and to evaluate themselves. Even with the quote-unquote report that the College Board gives you a few little bar graphs and stuff about your skills in various areas. It's not at all helpful for any student preparing for the test. Right, we need the data. We need how much time did you spend on this question? Show us where you were moving through the test. How much time did you spend on this question? Did you skip it? Did you answer it? What happened? Did you do well on geometry or algebra or whatever the case may be? Our testing app has that, and that's a huge advantage. The students that take advantage of that can then go over that with me. We can review it, go over with their tutor, go over in their class, and figure out a way to improve, right? So that is hugely important. And we've had to adjust by aligning the tests to what the real test would be, which we've done. So a lot of changes and a lot of issues with kind of like the beginning of the new digital SAT, which most of them are out of our control. What is in our control is obviously providing the students with the opportunity to do these things, which we are. So anyone that wants to take advantage of that, all you got to do is call up the office and you can do the practice test. So how should we prepare going forward? Like, what should we do if we're retaking the test and we want to do better, right? Number one is using the College Board materials is definitely risky because of the difficulty difference between the actual test and the and the PSAT and the practice tests, right? So that's where, maybe looking at using the third-party testing app that we provide would be helpful. Number two, take practice tests. I cannot stress that enough. I'm almost at the point where I'm gonna have to require it from students. I don't know how I'm actually gonna do that, but it's getting to a point where the ACT kids are in there every weekend grinding it out, and there's not an issue in the world with the ACT right now. And the SAT students, I'll do it at home, and then we're all human, right? Like I said, take a break, not, do half of it, not do it, and then it really slows down the progress, right? So that is number one, and we're taking measures here to kind of enforce that and make sure that students are doing what they need to do, and that part is on us. We do have to make sure that the students do these practice tests, and I'm looking through student accounts, and there's 1,000 questions in the system, and 45 of them have been done, right? And that's not gonna cut it, unfortunately. What I would say is, if you have never tried the ACT, and I know a lot of students have, right? A lot of the tutoring students especially have done both, right? If you have not tried the ACT, you really should give it a try. We don't have to deal with all this, right? It's just not, it's going to be less, less riddled with all this nonsense, because the test has been the same for the past 20 years. So we don't have to deal with all that. We have every practice test in the book. We don't have to use any third-party questions or anything like that. The question, you can go and do the December 2023 SAT, ACT, and we can grade it, and it's a real score, and there's no debate as to whether that's your actual performance. Is this accurate? Is this real? I did the blue book and it's too easy. That will not happen, right? So if you have not tried it, I highly, highly, highly encourage that you do try it. And if you have and you didn't like it, that's fine, right? Doesn't mean that you can't do well on the SAT. Many kids did, and many kids will, right? We just got to give students some time to, to work things out. But that is one thing I would mention is, if you didn't try it, you definitely should. There are some big differences, obviously the time management being the big one, the science section, but those things can be worked around, right? So now we have students doing both tests, and since the first SAT was administered, and the general national news has picked up on how challenging this test was. There's Forbes articles, there's all this stuff coming out, TikTok videos and everything. Kids are now coming in and saying, "Oh, that ACT is looking pretty good." When for the past 4 months, everyone was like, "I just want to do the SAT, it's shorter," And I always said, the thing that I tried to get across, I do a lot of speaking engagements, I talk to a lot of schools, college events, so on and so forth. It's hard to, and this is going back 3 or 4 months, right? Like going back to December, January, when kids just first got their PSAT score and everyone loved the test. It's hard to believe that there's a world where the College Board would just and this was a lot of articles that came out at that time, that they're quote unquote dumbing down the SAT and making it easier. That may be what the PSAT seemed like. And my statement at that time was, and it is to this day, is that it's less painful, right? Having to do a test for 2 hours and 15 minutes is really not debatable, right? That's way less painful than having to do a test for 3 hours, right? That last 45 minutes is the most painful part, right? You're tired, your brain is shot, and you have to grind out the last section of the ACT or the old paper SAT, and it's painful, right? So obviously there's two, if you want to be overly general, right, there's two motivators for humanity, right? Increase pleasure and reduce pain, right? So taking the SAT at that time seemed like it would reduce pain, right? Like, I don't need to do this long test. The passage is shorter, it seems better, right? And that was the way I always looked at it. It was like, okay, it's less painful, does not mean it's going to be easier, right? And I think that turned out to be pretty accurate. Turned out maybe to be even more challenging. And I think, to go into that for a second, why does the new digital SAT feel hard, right? Let's just take the math part, for example, right? On the ACT math part, which is 1/4 of the test, you have 60 math questions, right? So that's a lot for them to evaluate you on, right? So the scale is going to be generous. If you get 10 wrong, you're probably looking at a 30, 31 on the ACT. Maybe a 29, maybe a 30, maybe 31. Who knows? Depends on the scale, right? That's 10 wrong. That's 1/6 of the questions wrong. On the digital SAT, there's 44 math questions. 4 of them don't count because they're experimental. And that was also part of the reason that it felt very hard, was that those experimental questions could be whatever wacky question they want to put on there. Then there's only 40 scored questions. That's half the test, right? So to separate kids' scores, they have to really make it hard, right? Because if it was easy and everyone was getting 38 out of 40 right, how would they differentiate between a 780 and a 760 and a 740 and a 680? Like, it would be impossible to do so, right? Like, it wouldn't be feasible, right? So they have to make the test it's going to seem very challenging, right? Because it's really concentrated. You only have 40 questions for 50% of the test, whereas on the ACT, you have 60 questions for a quarter of the test. So there's a lot more leeway for easy, there's gonna be a lot more easy questions, like on the ACT, the first 30 are easy, and on the old SAT, the paper SAT, the first, 10, 15 questions on each math section were kind of a joke for most kids. They found it to be really easy, and then they just had to spend their time grinding those really challenging ones. And, but with 10 practice tests given out by the College Board, they had a really good chance of preparing themselves for that, especially with help. Now, with only 40 questions, and they're never going to show you your exam, and they're never going to release those questions, they could put whatever they want in there, and it's going to have to be hard, right? Especially the students which everyone wants to do, right? Move on to the hard module 2 of the adaptive testing, right? You did module 1, it was pretty easy. A lot of students probably did really well on that. And then you got 22 questions for module 2, where 2 of them don't count. So we got 20 questions for them to really separate the entirety of 600 to 800 on the scale. So it's going to have to be hard as hell. I mean, there's no way that they can make it easy and actually like have a real scale for the test. Another big problem, and this is something that's to be seen, right? If you think about the college process in general now, right? And this is something people may not know about, just talk about the paper test and the ACT, whatever, right? About half of the students nationwide get around 1,000 or below, right? Talk about the old paper SAT, ACT, about half of the students nationwide are getting a 20 or below, right? Those students can improve, right? But for the purposes of submitting to college, there's almost no value to those scores from most schools, right? Not to say that those students can't get it up and get a submittable score, but colleges aren't looking for that, right? Let's leave it at that. Why would all those kids continue to take the SAT, right? And then on the flip side, all the top colleges are reporting their average SAT scores 1450, 1500, 1510. And we're not talking about Ivies, we're talking about state schools, things like that. So you have this like bizarre system, right, where like half the kids don't have a submittable score, and then the other, then there's a large chunk of colleges that only want elite scores. So like if that continued, who would do the SAT other than someone scoring a 1400 or above, right? Like that would no longer continue, right? So it's very likely, and this may come out over the next few months, that the scoring system has changed, right? If I was a college board, right, I would not give any student an 800 on the test. It just doesn't do anything for their confidence. It makes them feel bad. It's not effective for them applying to college, and it just doesn't do anything good for anybody. It's just a waste. It's a waste for the college board to do that, and it's bad for the kids, right? And it gives them a negative feeling about the whole process and the whole thing, right? So if I was a college board, I would go back to the way things were before, and this is what they've done, right? If you think about it, right? We have the easy module and the hard module. So the easy module, they may not want to give out low scores anymore. They just kind of center that module around maybe 1,000. And then for the hard module kids, a 1,200 is where you start, and they're going to make it really hard to get to 1,550. I mean, we used to, with the paper SAT and even with the ACT, it's like 20-30% of the kids would get over 1,450 on the SAT. And on the ACT, confident any student starting with something in the mid to low 20s would be able to get a 30. And that's just bad it's a bad system, right? You have top colleges requiring 1,500s, and then 50% of the people scoring below 1,000. Like, what is that? That doesn't achieve very much for the colleges, for the students, for anybody, right? So they may be overhauling the entire scoring of the test, and that's something that could contribute to why students that got 1200s on their PSAT went in and took the digital SAT and got a 1050. And that's not even a student that necessarily came here, but just people that you read about online, people that I've spoken to that have called after. I mean, that is a totally new way of scoring the test, right? So the way that they could do that very easily is just lower the standard deviation, right? So if the top 1 percentile was getting a 1540 on the old test, they could just change the top 1 percentile to whatever they want. They can make it a 1600, they can make it a 1450, they can make it a 1200. Just compress the scores a little bit, bring up the low scores, bring down the high scores, and then have a better system. So if I was them, that's what I would do, right? Because it would separate students better. It wouldn't have as many people feeling as bad, and it would give the test more value. Like the test doesn't have the value because of the way the scoring has gone over the past, 5 years, I would say. So there's a lot of changes, right? And that's my main point. Is a lot of this is, like I said earlier, like we're dealing with a totally guinea pig situation where the students are being thrust into this totally new thing. And the best thing for the students is really to take practice tests, use those to prepare, and then just try to do your best on the real test. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now. And obviously as time goes on, all of it will be worked out. That's not very helpful for the students that are in 11th grade right now, but the only thing they can do is do their best. And, obviously these tests are graded on, it's not really graded on a curve. It's a little bit different than that, but we just want to use that as kind of a way to simplify how to explain it. It's graded on a percentile rank, right? So, the top one percentile is 1500 in 1 year. And then in 2004, when I took the SAT, if the top 1 percentile was a 1400, that's a great score. The number they attach to it doesn't matter as much as the percentile rank. So you should always look at that when you're looking at your SAT report. Is like, what is my percentile rank? And obviously they haven't had a lot of time to develop a percentile rank because many of the kids haven't even gotten their score yet, right? Because they took the school day test. So that will be developed after, the 2.1 million kids take the SAT this year, or whatever number it is, something like that, 1.8 million, 2.1 million. Then they'll really be able to get things going in the right direction. So it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period, and that's obviously to be expected with a totally new test. But we do have obviously the ACT being the stable, and that's their whole business plan, is to be the stable one, to not change that much, keep things consistent. And then we have the SAT is a huge opportunity if we can straighten things out a little bit, get better study materials, do more practice tests to do really well. So I feel positive about both. I was definitely feeling really, really, really positive about the digital SAT, and then they're playing these games with the materials, and that's a little bit disappointing. But that's kind of on their end, and obviously they're receiving a lot of criticism for that. So like I said, main thing is the tried and true prep strategy is do your practice tests, go over them, review them, learn from your mistakes, and then go into that test feeling confident that you know exactly what you're doing and that there's no question that should surprise you. And that is really achieved when the student has done all, and previously to the digital test where a student did all 10 of the administered SATs, because then they've seen all the questions that the College Board is actively giving out. And then they've done a lot of the other QAS tests, like the ones that were given, like I said earlier, you could access on your College Board account after taking the test. Students that did a lot of those, did the administered tests, did the given tests, they would never be surprised by the SAT, and the ACT students are never surprised by going into the ACT. So that's the environment we're trying to create for the digital SAT. And, we can create that, we can achieve that. The students just got to do the practice tests and do enough questions that nothing would be surprising. And that definitely can be achieved. So just understanding a little bit about the score report. This shows, and this was the sample one they sent out, and it didn't really pan out exactly like this, which is also interesting. You can see that there's a total score, percentile rank. You have the reading and writing score, and then the math score. Those percentile ranks don't make any sense, so I don't know why they gave this out. So that's just all wrong, but this is what they gave out as a sample. You could see the two scores. So the reading and writing score with a 600 range score is where a student moved to the hard module. The math score is where a student, that 500 score is probably a student that did not move to the hard module. It also shows a little bit of, you know, knowledge and skills, not very helpful. And then this crazy thing on the bottom that you can, you know, be what job you can do based on the score, industrial, machinery, mechanic. I mean, this is all just useless nonsense, honestly. But I guess the important part obviously is the score. With the adaptive testing, the main thing is, you know, if you don't move to that hard module, you're lumped into that low score range. So for any student preparing for the test, like item number 1 is do well enough on module 1 to get to the hard module. And you can imagine a student without a lot of experience with doing the actual test, taking practice tests, going in there, getting a little nervous, right? Realizing this is hard, getting stressed, and then kind of losing sight of the strategies and losing sight of what they're supposed to do, getting caught up on one question, not doing well, and then flipping over to the easy module and then not having good score, right? So there's this huge break point, and this was never the case before, this massive break point of like the hard module versus the easy module. So to get over 600, you have to get to the hard module. And that we knew that was always going to be the case, but that's proven to be true, like based on the first administration of the SAT. And you know, we had students that did get the hard module for one section and not for the other, and get a really high score on one section and then a really low, like wildly different, like I'm talking like 200 points different, like almost perfect on one section, and then get the easy module on the other section and get a low score. And that could have been a 1 question difference between moving to the easy and hard module. And that's unfortunate in terms of how it works. But if you fall just below the threshold for that hard module, your score could fluctuate 100 points with one question, unfortunately. And that's just a new challenge of the new test, right? We got to get to that hard module, and that's why doing the practice test and, you know, doing that module 1 and, you know, working on advancing to that hard module. Anyone with a score below 1200, item number 1 is try to get to the hard module so you can get over 1200, you know. And that's a new challenge. And you know, if you think back about the old test, if you faltered for a little bit on one part of the test, you could recover by doing the next section well. You know, like say you faltered on one path. We were all under the impression that this new test was going to like kind of alleviate this issue, right? If you think about the old version of the SAT with the long reading passages, if you didn't get one passage, okay, yeah, you're probably going to get a lot wrong on that. But then the next part of the test is the grammar portion, and that's a totally new section, and it's scored separately from the reading section. So you could recover, right? You could recover from that and do well on that and have a high score, right? Still get a good score. Now, module 1, module 2, you somehow mess up module 1. There's no recovery. You can't go backwards. There's no fixing it, right? So that has added a level of stress to the test that wasn't there before. So, and just a new kind of system, right? Same thing with ACT, right? You do one section, you say you mess up an entire section. Doesn't really matter, right? Because if you get a 35 on the next section, ACT's out of 36, you get some huge score on math and you totally mess up English or vice versa, whatever. You just go into that next test and you focus on that one section and you fix it, right? And that was the same thing with the paper SAT. Now, unfortunately, if you err on module 1, that whole portion of the test, the entire English portion, the entire math portion, is now unfortunately not going to be good, right? Because you're going to get a whole different set of questions than you would have gotten if you got one more question right. So there's this incredible break point in the test. I think that's going to cause a lot of students, you know, the students that are in that like 1200 range, if you fall to the easy module, your score goes way down. If you fall to the hard module, your score could go way up. So there's a good part about that, right? Like you flip modules the next time you take the test and you do pretty well, boom, you gain 100, 150 points on one part of the test. But the negative part is that if it goes the other way, then the score just goes way down, right? So that's a new thing. That's a new thing, and it's just going to be a challenge for this test. And this also shows a little bit more stuff that you can access on the College Board website, state averages, so on and so forth. You know, different data metrics. I mean, it's not really that helpful, but you know, obviously something to take a look at, and it could be useful in, you know, how you prepare for the next test. But this is just what they provide to you. You also can use the skills performance part. It kind of evaluates your performance in different areas. So you can see this student in algebra did quite well, but then in, you know, more advanced questions, problem solving and geometry, didn't do as well. So they're really scoring at like almost a 700 level in algebra, but then a much lower level in the other parts. And that's why their, eventual score ended up being a 500 for this fake sample student that we pulled up. So yeah, that can be somewhat helpful. Like I said earlier, our diagnostic system is way more advanced than this. And this is by design, right? They just don't want to, they probably have a wild amount of data from each student's SAT test, all the scoring data, all the information on how kids performed, and they don't give that out. And that's falls on us to do that, and that's fine. Like, we're happy to take that responsibility. So just to go over some final preparation strategies, things you could do. Taking the full length practice test. I probably said that 1,000 times, so I won't say that again. You could do them on College Board. The 2 new ones I would do. The old 4 ones are not as helpful. We have our online diagnostic SAT platform. There's hundreds of practice questions as well, additional practice. So if you get a question wrong, you can hit a little button that says follow-up exercises and do more exercises, more questions of that type. I highly encourage students to do that. You could use Khan Academy. That also was not really well aligned to the SAT at all. So we work with a lot of schools. A lot of schools just use that. Like, that's, tell kids do Khan Academy, do this, do that. That was not good. So you can use that. It's better for like memorizing formulas, memorizing grammar rules. Using it for content does not feed you any effective strategies. And if anything, you should probably go away from whatever strategies that, if they do tell you any on there, you don't want to use their strategies, because obviously they're not trying to help anybody. So we got to stay away from that. I think a big issue was vocabulary, was very challenging on the test. So you have to read. You can study vocabulary lists, but they could use any vocabulary word in the question. That's usually kind of a waste of time. So you just have to read and just become better with vocabulary. It is an important part of the test. This is not an important part of the prior SAT, and it's not an important part of the ACT. So if you find the vocabulary to be a huge issue for you on the SAT, you definitely want to consider that ACT. It's just become a huge part of the SAT again, and not, some students are fine with it and others find it to be really challenging. So that's something to think about on a personal level. Obviously you could say if you did a class, or you did nothing, or you just, prepare on your own, or whatever the case may be, you always want to consider a tutor. That's definitely a more pointed way for an individual student to improve. Obviously we can help you with that. There's a variety of options, obviously not with us, but there's tons of tutors out there. But with this new test, you definitely want, people that are, on top of this. This is a nationwide outcry for help. And we're getting tons and tons of calls, people that need assistance, and we're happy to help them. And then, last thing I'll say is, like, as much as I'm in the business of helping kids prepare for the SAT, I'm not in the business of, like, ruining their lives, right? So, like, you have to find a good balance. And I think that's one thing that students have definitely struggled with more than ever, with the digital test, being able to do it on your computer, just to click through things. I feel like the focus is not there for some students, and, like, just to regain that focus and be like, this is my SAT time. This is the time I'm going to prepare, whether it's 30 minutes a day, an hour, 2 hours a week, whatever it is, right? You got to block out that time and really, vigorously prepare for the test in that time, and don't let it be a defining factor for your entire life. It's not for anybody. There's billionaires that didn't go to college. There's people that go to top schools and are not successful, and there's people that go to, what some people would consider not a good school and are wildly successful. So obviously this is not a defining factor for any person's life, but it is important for kids today, just because of how the system has developed. So but my point there is, don't let this, like, consume your entire life. That's also not helpful to the student's performance. I think that's a huge issue with standardized tests. It is stressful, and as students that manage the stress well tend to do really well quickly, and the students that don't manage the stress well, it tends to be much more challenging for them. So you have to, like, take the pressure off yourself, and that's why taking the practice test, planning on taking the test multiple times, can really help kind of bring that down. And even students that do all that, right, they put a lot of pressure on themselves to do well. Like, I need to get a 1400 because of this school, whatever the case may be. That is not helpful to getting a 1400. Saying that to yourself while you're doing a test, like, I have to do this, like, thinking of this, like, kind of finite, thought process. Like, if I don't do that, if I don't get the hard module, if I don't do this, if I don't do that, all of that is thought that is not related to actually doing the test. From a psychological perspective, your mind is focused on getting into college, like, doing something, like whatever goals you have in the future. What if I don't get it? I'm not going to get it. Like, all of that is just distracting you from doing the question that's in front of you. You know what I mean? And I think that's a huge thing that students face, especially the first time taking a new test like this. So you got to like remove the pressure off yourself. And I could personally speak to this from my own personal experience. I had high expectations. My parents had high expectations for me. I was a good student. I was very good at tests. And the first time I took the SAT, I did not do well. That's the honest truth. I did well. I did decently well, but compared to how I was doing on practice tests and with my tutor and so on and so forth, I was getting 99.9 percentile scores, and I go into the real test and I just choked because I put way too much pressure on myself. And then the second time, I honestly, this is kind of a bad thing to say, but it's the truth. I didn't care from the perspective of like, I had a submittable score to college. I knew I was going to college. I just knew that I could do better. And I just went in there saying, I'm just going to do this test to the best of my ability. I tried hard, of course. I studied and tried hard, but I didn't really care about the outcome. And that is what really helped me rocket my score up to the 99.9 percentile at the time. And I see this with students on a continual basis, is the students that go in there nonchalantly, like, I know I prepared for this test, I'm going to do my best, whatever happens, get a better score than they expect. And the students that go in there piling the pressure on themselves get a lower score than they expect, because they're putting way too much pressure on themselves and they're thinking about things that do not have to do with actually doing the test. So that's my psychological advice for the day, for taking these kind of tests. And that applies throughout any test, any standardized test. Applied when I took the LSAT, same situation, really stressed the first time, knew it's even more important than the SAT. Anyone went to law school or knows anything about that, you got to do well in the test. And the first time I choked because I was like so intent on going to top law school and getting a scholarship was really my main goal. My parents said, we helped you with college, you're cut off now. You got to handle this one on your own. Looking at the price tag, I said to myself, I got to get a scholarship. And then the second time I went in there just much more relaxed and did way better. And then the same thing with the bar exam. Any kind of standardized test, it really is very helpful. So last conclusions, why was the test hard? It really was never going to be easy. I think the articles came out, everyone liked the test, and it was a shock, right? But I think we're hopefully past that point. We're going to move on, understand what the test is like, and do well. Not a lot of practice materials was very harmful to the students. The practice testing not being emphasized, that can change things overnight. For any student that just commits to that process, does those tests, and that's why we provide them, as part of the programs, and small fee for the testing app, and then basically you can take as many as you want. Also, this is the first administration of digital SAT, first test for all these students taking it. If this was the paper SAT or the ACT, I always tell students, first time you go in there, my expectations are, do your best. That's my expectation. Do the best you can, and if you can say you did that, that's a success, and then we'll fix it the next time. And that's why the top students with top scores are usually taking the test 2 or 3 times. Yeah, there's a select number of students that one and done something like the SAT. That's extremely rare. How can it be fixed? Well, we did have a lot of students that did do well in this test, and the students that did the practice tests. They saw a lot of the challenging problems, and they didn't panic when they realized that this test was hard. And that's the main thing. And maybe they had already taken the paper test, they had a little testing experience, and they just went in there and just said, whatever. If it's hard for me, it's hard for everybody. And that's the other fact that can kind of give students some pause to understand that this is a standardized test, right? So everyone's doing the hard module, everyone's doing the easy module. We're getting the same test theoretically. So to place it on yourself, like, I'm the one who the test is hard for, that's not helpful, right? It's hard for everybody, and it's scaled and equated as such, right? So if it's hard and you manage that well, you will do well. Doesn't matter. They can make it impossible. And if you get 5 questions right, you get a 1600. Like, they can make it however they want to make it. And that's up to them, right? I think the last thing was, especially on the math part, the Desmos calculator is hugely advantageous. That's something that, is covered in our book. For anyone that has the book from a class or from tutoring, you do want to make sure that you review that. That is very helpful. Students that use that effectively, I think, had a little bit of an advantage. A lot of students said to me, I don't want to use it because I'm used to using my calculator that I have from school. And I try to, encourage them to try to use a Desmos calculator. It does make things easier. It's really not that much of a difference from an advanced, TI 89 calculator, whatever students use in school. There's certain specific instances where it's better. And I think that like, if that problem is like really hard and I can't do it on my TI 89 or whatever I have from school, but I can do it on Desmos, that's like a transformative moment during a standardized test. It's like, I'm not like, think about the two paths, right? Student number one, I'm struggling with this question. I can't answer it. I'm wasting time. Student number two, type in Desmos, get the answer, have that feeling of that like little victory, and then move on to the rest of the test and do really well. So, we're going to have to put a greater emphasis on that. We have obviously put an emphasis on it, but I think students have kind of wanted to stick with their school calculator, and I'm almost at the point of like forcing them to like just learn how to, just you got to use the Desmos calculator. So that's another thing that can help for any students that felt like I used my school calculator. You got to really review the part of the book that goes through the Desmos calculator. If anyone has any questions about that, feel free to ask me, call me. I will explain it's very brief to really explain how to use that. It works exactly like the regular calculator, except you can type with it. And it has some minute advantages that could be a game changer for students. Extra study resources, probably mostly customers on here, but anyone that's not, we do have the testing platform, the digital SAT book, and then, just general guide on how to, reach your potential for these tests. There's a QR codes there. I'll leave this up for a second. Anyone wants to look into those things, feel free. If you do have any questions about those things, feel free to direct those towards me or my team, and we're happy to help you guys. I do offer my time up to any family that wants it. So, please, if you want to speak with me about this, I'm more than happy to connect with you and go over your digital SAT performance, whether you should try the ACT, your college plan for your student. If you are a student, I'm happy to, discuss your performance with you and really try to help you guys make sure that you're going in the right direction. That's always been the case. That's nothing new. Like, I'm not doing that because of the new digital SAT. I've always done that. Some people take huge advantage of that. And I love that. That's the part of this that I really love to do, is to help guide people through this. That's what I didn't have. I had the tutor, my parents, incredible, providing me with that, providing me with, the best knowledge they could at the time. Obviously, we're talking pre-YouTube, pre-SAT prep being this like huge thing, college prep. So the information wasn't there. And then when I went through the law school process, I was an adult, it's on myself. I had to educate myself, and then I was able to, to get massive scholarships and all that good stuff. So I love to kind of give that back to the families that come to us, and even people that don't. Whatever the case may be, I'm happy to help. And then for anyone that wants to hear directly from me how to prepare for the digital SAT, if you're not working with me, we do have the digital SAT strategy course. There's a QR code for that. This course goes along with the book, and this is where I teach the SAT course fully with the book. So with the Decoding Digital SAT book. And a lot of schools have this now. So maybe your school has it, maybe they don't. But a lot of schools provide this for free for students. It's extremely affordable for schools. And this course is me teaching the SAT class at a much lower cost than it would take to have me actually teach your students. So there's a huge value there as well. Anyone interested in that, has a question about it, feel free to give me a call. Also, you can check out the QR code there as well. And then finally, and very important, the upcoming SAT dates. The registration for the May SAT is coming up soon. So anyone who wants to retake the test, they didn't get what they want, really should register for that, especially if you don't have a lot of APs. And then you do have the June test thereafter. So definitely register for those tests. Like, if you're not happy with your score, even like I said, if we, time travel back 2 years to paper SAT, that's not surprising. Like, the first test is always a challenge for students. We got to build on that. And that's why you got the momentum going. You're studying for the test. You got to just give it another crack. I highly encourage everyone to do that. Doesn't mean you even have to, pay us for anything. You can do the free practice tests and still get better at the test. So highly recommend that you take a look at that. And then obviously there's more after that, but you have the fall test. It's August, and then the fall test. So that's pretty much it. Any questions? I'm happy to answer any questions that people have about anything particular. I'll give you guys a minute to type if someone has a question, and then if not, take it from there. All right, well, I guess there's no further questions. But if anything comes up or you have like a personal question you want to ask me, you don't want to ask in front of a group, feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call. I'm happy to help you guys. And last thing I'll say is, obviously, these changes seem a little bit challenging and frustrating, but it will all be fine. I always tell people that it's always been the case, no matter how many times they change the test, no matter what happens. You will get into college, it all will work out in the long term. But what can only benefit that is, the students getting in there and doing what they need to do, and us, facilitating that. So thank you guys for joining on tonight. Hopefully this was helpful and informative, lower the stress level a little bit. It's all going to work out, and we will get it done. So anyone that needs my help, my time, feel free to give me a call. I'm always happy to help you guys. So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for joining on. I appreciate it.